Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We're talking about, before the break, talking about Bethany Hamilton, the female professional surfer. She was the young lady who had her arm bitten off in a shark attack 20 years ago and went on to still become this professional surfer. Well, she's questioning men competing against her in surfing, so she got bounced from being a spokesman for this popular surfing outfit and replaced, ironically enough, by a man pretending to be a woman who is competing on the women's surfing circuit. This is the sort of stuff, I guess, that Joe Rogan was talking about recently when he, and I mean, just as an aside, I don't know how anybody who describes himself as Joe Rogan is like so popular or a go-to guy for self-respecting conservatives, but that's a conversation for another time. Rogan describing how what happened in California not only drove him out of California, but drove him at least somewhat more to the right. Take a listen.
Well, I used to be a part of the Blue Bubble. I was 100% a left-leaning person who lived in Los Angeles. I was 100%. I never voted Republican my whole life. I was very left-leaning, especially with like any social issues. When it comes to financial things, I'm a little bit more conservative, but at the end of the day, I'm way more left than I am right. But California went nuts, man. It's gone like full communist. It's out of its mind. And their approach to law enforcement is so insane. It's so insane. The no cash bail, the letting people out for committing violent crimes, the not stopping people for stealing up to whatever money it is. What is it, $900 now? I think they raised it. I think they made it a little higher. San Francisco is non-existent. Most of San Francisco is emptied out of like big chain stores and big department stores.
I wouldn't even do stand-up there anymore.
It's crazy.
They ruined it.
They ruined the city.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you can bring it back. The structure's still there. But you'd have to have some hardcore Rudy Giuliani type motherfucker to come in there and knock heads.
Wow.
And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. They're peace, love, and granola and wear a mask.
Yeah, and rearrange your body parts, which is something else Joe Rogan has railed against, to his credit, I will say. And such in California, to the extent that migrants that are dropped off in L.A. or make their way through California's border with Mexico into the state are not just entitled to free health care, they're entitled to free gender reassignment surgeries. That's what he's talking about. That doesn't make him a conservative thinker. It just makes him a master of the obvious. But nonetheless, I mean, so there is this backlash. But the problem is that people who would replace Bethany Hamilton with a dude as their spokesman for women surfing and their surfing products, they're in control of the institutions. And as we were just discussing, the idea that there are some mental health professionals that are going to save us from the people that are in control of these institutions and perpetuating this ideology. That's who we're talking about. Those that are in control of the medical professions and the medical schools. Now you're starting to see the problem we've got? Structural. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Ian Kingsbury, Director of Research for Do No Harm, Senior Fellow at the Educational Freedom Institute as well. Ian, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, we were just discussing, so it's a perfect segue to you. We had seemingly some victories over with DEIB now. I'm sorry, I've got to include B, belonging, because that's now the new acronym for some of these corporate committees. So we had some victories with the Supreme Court's decision in the Harvard admissions cases. with the self-immolation of a couple of Ivy League presidents. But nothing stops. Nothing is stopping, and I don't see any substantial change of institutional control with respect to med schools and other associated academic and cultural institutions as it pertains to some of the issues that we're talking about. Do you?
No, things are completely out of control in the medical field. Medical training is just being supplanted by woke indoctrination. So all this time that you would hope that medical students are learning how to diagnose illness or to perform surgery, an enormous amount of that time is just spent learning about woke social justice activism. It's really alarming.
And so,
well, this is a moneymaker, though. I mean, isn't this going to be $1 billion industry by 2050?
For the transgender medicine?
Yep, and surgeries.
What,
Sure.
2030.
Yeah, there's certainly big money to be made here. It's hard to say truthfully the extent to which that's really even animating all of this. I think for certain people, certainly it can help rationalize it. But truthfully, I think the bigger problem is just that there are zealots who have captured these medical institutions who really believe in this stuff. They think that these experiments that they're doing are for the advancement of humanity. That's really the bigger problem.
Yeah, and so you have some bad examples and some less than properly couched statements that come out of a Vanderbilt University hospital system and University of Wisconsin hospital system, and there's a bit of a firestorm around them for a moment, and maybe some people get shuffled around. But it doesn't stop. I know that clinic over in the UK got shut down because of the adverse outcomes for patients. That was a Tavistock, but none of this is stopping. And so, do you have a prescription on terms of how to make it stop? What can people do? What can the medical profession do against the institutional powers at the AMA and at these med schools?
Right. Unfortunately, things are so out of control that it essentially does compel legislative action at this point. And we're seeing this and unfortunately right now it's exclusively red states, but efforts toward, for example, restricting access to puberty blockers, to cross-sex hormones, to surgery. So Ohio was just the latest state to take this measure after the legislature overrode the governor's veto on this. But, there are a number of states now that have done this, and unfortunately there's a number more that probably are going to have to do this because it's not even clear that the AMA or these other organizations can see themselves to sanity. They're going to need, legislative action.
What about something like a Great Barrington Declaration to organize medical professionals from across the country, across institutions, to speak with a singular voice and to have some profile so people see that what you're being told by those who have the titles isn't what equally credentialed professionals in these sectors believe.
Right. So I think my organization, Do No Harm, is helping leading the charge on this. We have many members who are doctors who are starting to find their voice on opposing these sorts of things publicly. I think if there's reason for optimism, it's becoming a little bit easier or more comfortable for medical professionals to speak out on this because things have simply gotten so out of control and because I think people are understanding that these issues aren't just going to resolve themselves and they can't just sit on the fence and wait for things to get better, that you do now have all of these people who are really signing on to this project to try to restore sanity to medicine.
Are you starting to see yet that can be quantified a decline in the quality of the doctors? Let's just speak to doctors specifically. It's one thing to be to focus on plastic surgery or even worse, gender reassignment or abortion. But you're still a qualified expert in your field. But it's another thing if you're not a qualified expert in your field because you've been focused on, DEI tracks and the rest of the politics surrounding what goes on in medical schools as what went on at their undergraduate schools. So the quality of the professionalism in the profession, is there a demonstrable decline that is measurable at this point?
So I don't know offhand data that would speak to that decline. I certainly know anecdotally this is something that an enormous number of people are aware of. We hear from members of our organization, other members of the public, that they're nervous about seeing a doctor who's under the age of 40 or under the age of 50 because they understand that the quality of the medical training that they received is very different than what they would have received a generation ago. It's just so much about this social activism. I spoke a couple weeks ago with a medical student at the UCLA School of Medicine, which is one of the absolute worst offenders in all of this. There was an article actually in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago about how they were segregating their medical students by race for certain activities. Yeah, crazy place. And unsurprisingly, according to the student, you have large numbers of students who are failing basic assessments as part of their training within the medical school because, they're not learning medicine, they're learning just crazy woke nonsense.
Well, you had also that high-profile case, was it within the last year or so, of that renowned organic chemistry professor, I think it was at NYU, or definitely East Coast, that essentially got fired because he was failing kids in organic chemistry that were failing organic chemistry. But you don't want kids that fail organic chemistry going on to be a doctor.
Right. Yeah, it's there are certainly people out there who are trying to do the right thing and still enforce rigor and standards. The problem is when you think of a school like UCLA, every incentive is for you to sort of just join the chorus and keep your head down and participate in the woke insanity. I applaud people who fight back, but if you're in a place like UCLA or whichever, and I can't recall the institution, the one you just mentioned, but unfortunately, you get a target on your back for trying to be a sane person.
What about the breakdown in trust that's not DEI related, but I mean it's sort of the same dynamic, the groupthink that you're talking about, the sharing of a brain, the madness of it all because of politics, and I'm talking about the trust relationship that was broken during COVID, and now more information is coming out. Representative Tom Massey from Kentucky posted this missive from Anthem Health Insurance about the incentives that doctors had to get all their patients vaccinated, regardless of their viewpoints, regardless of whether or not they thought maybe kids don't need to be vaccinated, but older people with comorbidities did. None of that mattered. It was a straight schedule of you get this percentage of our clients vaccinated, and you get this much bonus. And you had a pediatrician named Dr. Kirk Milhone who testified before the House Committee on COVID, talking about exactly that, the idea that doctors would and hospitals would have been paid to do things that were potentially averse to their patients' interests, or at least they thought so, and they went along with it because if you didn't go along with it, then there was the stick on the other side of it.
Yeah, the medical profession is burning an enormous amount of trust and credibility. And I think for the most part, the people inside of it don't really understand what's happening because they tend to get wrapped up in their own bubbles and sort of not fully taking stock of how people outside of that assess it. And so you look at the uptake of other standard childhood vaccines, and you can see those rates decreasing. And then you'll have statements from people in organizations like the American Medical Association trying to blame actually conservatives and Republicans for eroding that trust. But they never look in the mirror and try to actually, acknowledge the role that they might have played in all of this. And it's really sad because, modern medicine can do amazing and terrific things for people. There's going to be real consequences to the trust that they forfeited.
He is Ian Kingsbury, Director of Research for Do No Harm, Senior Fellow at the Educational Freedom Institute as well. Ian, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
A storm is on the horizon, and you need to keep the lights on